Well, we're going to take a look at this text today, and it kind of goes along with our lesson from our book yesterday, comparing the North and the South, and maybe who was better equipped to fight the Civil War, who had some advantages and disadvantages. So I'm going to read this text with you, and then this text will also be on your question set today to use as a reference as you find the answers. So let's take a look at this text called The North and the South. And what we're doing is comparing and contrasting their ability to fight the Civil War. The North had a much better railroad, we see in this picture here, a much better railroad network than the South. However, as you can see from this photo, Nashville had a lot of railroads. So this is Nashville, Tennessee. There's some railroads there. But the North had a lot more railroads. When the Civil War began, the North and South weren't evenly matched, as this chart shows. So the first thing here is we're going to look at is non-enslaved men of fighting age. That means men who were not slaves. The North had 4 million and the South only had 1.2 million. So the North had a lot more men who could fight. The number of factories, the North had 100,000 factories. The South only had 20,000 factories. Miles of railroad, the North had 20,000 miles of railroad. The South only had 9,000 miles of railroad. Percentage of the railroad equipment, that would be like the engines and the trains and the parts you would need to build a railroad. The North had 96%. The South only had 4%. The size of the Navy, the North had 40 ships in their Navy at the beginning of the war. The South had no ships. They had 0 ships. They didn't have a Navy. Why were all these things important? Well, factories produced all the things armies needed, like guns, cannons, cannonballs, gunpowder, musket balls, shoes, and uniforms. So the factories made those things. And where were most of the factories? In the North. Having more railroad meant that the North could move an army easier than the South. It also meant the North could resupply its army better than the South. Railroad equipment was important because there were times during the war when railroads, tracks, and bridges were destroyed. Because the North had almost all the railroad equipment, the North could easily repair railroads more easily than the South. The relative size of the navies remind us that the North had an organized military at the beginning of the war. The South had to build its army and navy from nothing. There were Northerners who pointed all of this out when the war started. William T. Sherman, a U.S. Army general during the war, wrote a letter to a Southern friend when the war started. "Where are your men and appliances of war to contend against them?" he wrote. "The North can make a steam engine, locomotive, or railway car. Hardly a yard of cloth or pair of shoes can you make. You are rushing into war with one of the most powerful, ingeniously mechanical, and determined people on earth." So he's giving them a warning. He's like, you guys, what are you thinking? We have all the equipment. You have none. And you're going to fight against the North? There were, however, ways in which the South was either evenly matched or even had an advantage. Most of the Civil War was fought in the South. Because of this, the Confederacy had a home field advantage, a better knowledge of the land, and an additional reason for its people to fight. During the war, a U.S. Army officer asked a captured Confederate private why he was fighting. And he said, "I'm fighting because you're down here," he answered. The South had plenty of horses. This was important in an era in which horses were still the main method of transportation, and in which soldiers on horses, known as cavalry, was still a big part of the army. This photo shows the U.S. Army needed horses to move guns during the Civil War. Now, the South had great military leaders, such as General Robert E. Lee and Thomas Jackson. Most of them had been to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, New York, where they were classmates with many of the Northern officers. The South also had the same advantages that the colonies had during the Revolutionary War. They didn't have to win every battle. They just had to fight and survive until people in the North got tired of the war. It should also be pointed out that in the first part of 1861, the Confederacy moved quickly to address some of its weaknesses. It is true, for instance, that at the beginning of the war, most of the gun factories were in the North. However, the Confederacy quickly moved to create a huge gun factory in Richmond, Virginia, and to expand gun factories in places like Columbus, Georgia. The South also bought lots of guns from Great Britain. In fact, we now estimate that a single British arms manufacturer made and sold more than 900,000, almost a million rifles to the United States during the Civil War. So the South were getting their weapons from England, about half of them to the Confederate Army. One more point about the Civil War. During the war, the U.S. Army and Navy, both of which were fighting for the continuance of the Union to keep everything together, were generally referred to as the Union Army and the Union Navy. We will do this for the rest of this booklet. So anytime we're reading one of these texts and it talks about the Union Army and Union Navy, it's talking about the Army and Navy that belong to the United States. This picture up here has this caption. It says, Admiral David Farragut, who was born near Knoxville, Tennessee, is on the USS Hartford. The Union had a huge advantage at the beginning of the war in that it had a navy. So this is a ship, and one of these guys is Admiral David Farragut. I'm not sure which one he is. Maybe the one closest right here, who was born near Knoxville. Interesting. Well, we've learned some more about the advantages and disadvantages of both sides. You've got some questions to answer about this text. I'll let you get to it. Talk to you later.